Good afternoon, Fakeaholic friends. Today is Saturday, August 17th, and we picked, about 90 pounds of fruit yesterday and another 60 pounds of fruit today, and there's more that we could pick. We know that the birds still are damaging some. They've gotten somewhat accustomed to the bird scare device, but it's still fairly effective. And I say that without the device we have maybe 75% bird damage, and with the device maybe we have 25%. So it's a great improvement. But also we are still developing markets for our fruit, and don't have enough demand for it yet established, or we haven't found that demand. So we have some fruit still on the tree that's ready to be picked, and we'll probably pick more on Monday, maybe Wednesday, we'll see. Anyway, we primarily irrigate our figs with drip irrigation, and they are actually being drip irrigated right now, though that's hard to see. But we also occasionally flood irrigate it, and that's for two purposes. We have some trees that just with the high temperatures we have are showing stress, and this gets a good supply of water there through the whole root system, whereas we have two drip emitters for each tree, and those drip emitters spread out fairly well in our soil profile because we don't have sandy soil. If you have sandy soil and using drip irrigation, the water just goes almost straight down, whereas in heavier soils, and we have silty clay loam here, though we got about 6% organic matter in our soil, which is quite high for most parts of the world actually, but this is former swampland. So it does spread out pretty well, but still this flood irrigation gets water throughout the whole system. Secondly, I know from prior soil testing and leaf sample that I've done, there's some sodium in parts of our orchard, and this helps flush those salts out. I'm not going to go a lot into soil science and chemistry. I'm not an expert in that. I did take 4 soil science courses in the 1970s. Kind of an old guy, but I remember things quite well, and I remember calcium has 2 positive charges and sodium 1, and so we broadcast gypsum in the orchard in March or April. I forget what month it was now. Probably it was April. We were so wet this winter. And what happens is that calcium helps displace the sodium that is tied up with one clay particle, and that sodium needs to go somewhere, and with flood irrigation we help flush it out. Now, I haven't mentioned this in prior videos, but this orchard is planted at approximately 4 or 5 feet below sea level. Might be the lowest fig orchard in the world, I don't know. But we are standing about, or I'm standing, you're watching, at about 7-8 feet below river level, but we have levees that hold by the river. This is called reclaimed land, though I don't know that it was ever first claimed and then lost, but just that's the term that's used. Because of the high water table that we have here, it's hard to flush out the salts. We have drainage ditches to keep our heads above water, and still trying to get water completely flushed out is challenging. And we put in a drainage system this past March. It's not just for our figs, but for other fields that we're planting to, or other orchard trees, and also some of the alfalfa that would just get drowned out in high rainfall years. So with the drainage system, there's we call it a tile line, but it's black plastic pipe that's 6-inch in diameter, perforated with pea gravel and sand surrounding it, and it's all installed with a laser system that controls elevation, along with very precise GPS coordinates that are supposed to be precise within 0.01 inches, which I find just amazing. But we have it sloping at about 1/10 of a foot for every 100 feet that it travels. And so these tile lines go on either side of our orchard, and they allow for this water, excess water that percolates through the soil, to go somewhere. This is going to be one of my longer videos, but it's not just about one fig variety, and I want to try to cover this in one topic to answer various questions I've had. So that's one way to get rid of a problem with a nutrient that is essential to plants, but only in minor amounts, but it's at toxic levels that causes damage. And we're trying to flush out sodium now, so that's the second purpose. Now, with fertilization of our orchard, people have asked, what fertilizers do you recommend? And there's people that are very willing to give out fertilizer recommendations, and I'm not, because it really depends on your own soil conditions and what nutrients you have present. I know we have high levels of phosphorus present in our soil. Unfortunately, the pH is a bit too high for that to all be available, so we do use phosphorus. But you might have no phosphorus or very little phosphorus in your soil, and so you need more. Nitrogen is fairly well present in our soil also, and that's related somewhat to the higher organic matter in our soils. And there's a timing issue that isn't addressed very often, and I've used a lab to do a frequent testing. I did it in my figs before. Figs have not been a crop I've harvested a lot, but I also grow chestnuts on our farm, and that is a major crop for me. And on that I have monthly sampling done that I take and send into the lab of soil at the beginning of the year one time, my irrigation water source, which is from the Sacramento River, just to make sure that the water quality is good, and that's quite stable in most years, except for in 2015 we had some saltwater intrusion because of low river flows. And we have leaf samples taken every month. In the month of July or August, I typically actually take 2 samples to make sure I'm on top of my nutrition plan. And the other thing that I do is I take there are isometers, tubes, we just can call them. I have tubes in my chestnut orchard, and I had 2 tubes in this fig orchard. They're actually still there. I'm just not taking samples from them. And we, after we irrigate, we extract water through those tubes from different depths. And so in the fig orchard, I did at 8 inches and 16 inches. In the chestnut orchard, I also do at 24 inches. So we test what the pH is of the soil solution at those depths. The 24 inches primarily to make sure that we're not leaching out nutrients, that we're fertigating too much, and we're putting too much water on and flushing the nutrients right past the majority of the plant's roots. That's not really an issue here with the drip irrigation I use in my figs, but anyway, there's a life cycle of all crops, and we need to recognize that, or we should recognize that, to provide good nutrition for our plants. And I'll show, I don't have a chart for figs or chestnuts. The lab I used did not have one for either. At least I know they didn't have for chestnuts, but they provided one to me years ago for walnuts that somewhat similar to chestnuts in the growth cycle. So I'll show an image of this here now, a chart, and it's called phenology, and in other words, it's the growth cycle of the crop. And so let's just take a look at this here. And I'll talk during this here, but you can pause it to take a look further if you wish. But it shows you, the different cycles of the plant growth during the year. And the bottom dark line is root growth. And what nutrient do we need for root growth? Well, primarily phosphorus is important for that. And so we need to make sure that we have phosphorus available to the plant in the spring. So in this case, they're showing walnuts, in March. So we need to get it on. Well, I don't irrigate anything that early in the year because our soil is quite wet still. There's also bloom, which peaks slightly after root growth. And phosphorus is also necessary for bloom. And I think everyone knows that the fig fruit that we're eating is actually a flower. It's an inverted flower. And so for development of that fig, we need phosphorus for that also. Now, if you look, fruit size there, that's going to vary much differently for figs than something like walnuts. And let me just, jump ahead here. The fruit size is showing, the fruit weight is showing. So there's, again, different for that. But for plant growth, we need nitrogen. And I also don't need a lot of growth going on after July or so, but I apply nitrogen primarily in the spring also. If I see I don't have much shoot growth, I'll go ahead and give more. Some of my fig trees are struggling, and I'm not positive the causes for that. I might have some with a nematode issue. I've done some digging around and haven't seen signs of nematodes, but some of them just a weaker root system, and so we're applying phosphorus and nitrogen to those trees even now. But one nutrient that's not talked about a lot by many people, in fact most of the talk is centered around nitrogen, it seems, but is potassium. And this lab that I've used had strongly suggested that I use potassium on my chestnut orchard. And a typical old school farm approach would be to put fertilizer on one time a year, and that's it. My dad farmed a couple thousand acres of corn, and everything got put on it just prior to planting or at planting, and that was it. Some people might side dress one time. And orchards is much the same. People might fertilize once or twice a year. Well, I'm fertilizing my chestnut orchard 20 to 30 times per year. And first I was putting on potassium just monthly, and last year my agronomist, the person helping me change from one year to the next, and asked me if I would have a problem switching from monthly to every irrigation, and I did that. Well, 1 year in itself isn't 100% proof, but in 2018, my chestnut crop, I had record production. My trees were 19 years old. They're 20 years old now. And usually when you have a record production, record weight, you have smaller crop size. Well, I also had record size last year. And the only thing I changed was putting potassium on with every irrigation. And we think of our own dietary needs. We don't eat just once a week or once a month, usually not even once a day. Some people are too busy, like me, at times, and only have time for one meal a day. But same thing with plants. And I'll say, the soil is a buffer, is a reservoir, it reserves these nutrients too. But again, it made a big difference in my crop last year, I think, with that. As explained to me, potassium aids in cell division, and it helps with fruit development. Calcium is also an important nutrient for fruit development. I put gypsum on earlier. I said there's usually pretty good calcium in the soil, but in our area we find that magnesium is usually a little bit higher than calcium, and we prefer to have, for best plant growth and fruit development, calcium being twice as high as magnesium. So we need to put more calcium on to there are competing uptakes with the plants. So at this time of year, I'm mostly putting on or focusing on potassium. But again, because some plants are struggling, I'm putting on more. Now, some people have asked about fruit thinning, and I don't bother to do that because I have so many trees. But I know that the potassium is going to those fruits as they're developing very much. And if you have fruits that set too late in the year to mature, they're grabbing potassium from that tree that could otherwise be better used by fruits that you do plan on picking. So I would suggest for best fruit production to go ahead and thin off those fruits. It won't have an effect. Plant growth is more influenced by water supply and nitrogen availability. So I would suggest doing that. And I'll give you an example of some very close looking that I did of this issue. 2 years ago, I was taking a real close look at my potassium levels and trying to figure out what was going on. Sorry, my worker started by a tractor. I asked him to wait a minute there. I took a look at the potassium levels, and I was putting potassium in, and I do also take samples of my actual irrigation water that's being applied, and the potassium level was high in that water, as I would expect, because I was injecting it into my system. But I found that even at the 8-inch probe level, when I took a sample out, it was very low already. And I checked my leaves, I pulled leaf samples the next day, and it also was had not accelerated at that point. It was low, and even though I just put on a lot of potassium, and I'm using potassium thiosulfate. I honestly don't know what potassium sources that hobby grower might be able to use that would be comparable. Muriate of potash is often used, but that's not readily available, whereas potassium thiosulfate is immediately available to plants. Same thing as putting on nitrogen. Anyway, this potassium thiosulfate was not present in my 8-inch probe, not my 16-inch probe, or very little anyway, and not gone up. And this is when I was putting on potassium just once a month, two years ago. So, my agronomist and I talked about this quite a bit, and he says, Harvey, it's already in the nuts. It's very mobile. So here I am putting on potassium, and within 24 hours, it's already within the nut or the fruit, have you. So it just shows you how quickly, our plants can take up nutrients and make use of them. So again, take a look at, how your plants are doing and what growth stage they are. There's some sparrows, I think, that are eating some figs that just flew off. I'm doing the best I can with that. Again, your own situation is going to be different, but I suggest that you try to focus on those nutrients that are benefiting your plants. One more benefit of potassium, it helps plants deal with stress. And when we had 108 degrees yesterday, 107.6 the day before, 105 degrees the day before that, and 102 degrees the day before that. And today, below 90 is great, but those are stressful times for plants. People think that, it's great, you got all that summer heat. Well, over 95 degrees is not beneficial for any plant. We would prefer it to stay cooler than that. So potassium aids in plants dealing with stress, and so it's something good for that. So again, just taking a look at my water supply here, I'll just talk about that briefly. We have riparian water rights from the Sacramento River. We have a large pump, 15 horsepower pump. We do not pay much for the water. It's a complicated situation, but it's in our state constitution here in California that we have rights to make use of this water or draw as much water as we need for beneficial use. And all of this is benefiting my orchard. None of it is going to waste, none of it flowing off into any ditch. Beyond my orchard is going into an alfalfa field that is also being ready for irrigation today. So I have a pump, and it pumps nearly 2,000 gallons per minute, but I'm only using a little bit of it here. I'm probably putting 200 or 300 gallons per minute on this row. I was flood irrigating 2 rows earlier, but now just 1. It's all underground pipe. It takes about 2,000 feet of underground to get to my fig orchard, but we have a valve there. We open it up and we flood irrigate. I'm maybe going to put some other valves in here so I can more easily irrigate more rows at one time. So anyway, I hope all that is helpful, and that's, you know, my understanding of things. I think that I have looked way more into it than most people, but again, I am a commercial grower. I'm not a scientist, but I have taken a lot of courses in it and consulted with people, so I think that is some information that should be helpful to you. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.